Well, thank you very much indeed. I must say, that was a much warmer introduction than I had in Edinburgh the other week. It's funny, really, I spent much of my adult life attempting to be locked in pubs. I never thought the police would do it to me. When I think back on 20 years of UKIP, the electoral story started with the Eastleigh by-election. And I was UKIP's first ever candidate in that Eastleigh by-election all those years ago. And I can tell you that on the night, by a crushing, stunning margin of 162 votes, I managed to beat the late, great, screaming Lord Such, and therefore was not loved. So how extraordinary that it was Eastleigh again that came up for a by-election, and what an amazing campaign that was. Diane, our candidate, who you're going to hear from this afternoon, and we went from 3.6% of the vote to 27.8% of the vote, and nearly took the seat. And that by-election has changed the national perception of UKIP. Since that by-election, we as a party have been changing the national political debate, and I'm enormously proud of that achievement. And it was an amazing platform for us to head into the English County Council elections. And I started off in Cornwall, in a small market town called Callington, and I started off on what was called the Common Sense Tour. And I toured all up through the western counties of England, up to Hadrian's Wall, across the top, and back down again. And the most astonishing thing was everywhere we went, and it didn't matter whether they were Tory areas or Labour areas, everywhere we went, the common theme was people saying, "We agree with you, you're the only people who are standing up and saying what we think." And I picked that up right across the country, and we held public meetings, and I mean, one or two of them, there were so many people crammed into the rooms, it rather resembled the black hole of Calcutta. But such was the enthusiasm that I really was very buoyed up and very optimistic for how we do. And I remember on the eve of the polls, talking to our chairman, Steve Crowther, and I said to Steve, "How do you think we're going to do?" He said, "How do you think we're going to do?" I said, "Well, I think we're going to get 18 or 19% of the vote." And Steve said, "Well, could it be possible that maybe it'll be 20? I said, "Don't be ridiculous." Well, May the 2nd came, and I did the This Week show with Andrew Neil, went back to the hotel that I was staying in Westminster, because I had to be up at 5 to go and do some of the breakfast programmes. I thought, well, I'll just put the television on, because one or two counties are going to be declaring overnight. And the first thing I saw was the South Shields by-election. We're in a constituency, we've got some Geordies here, and we're very good. They always make themselves known, don't they? In a constituency in which we'd never stood before, and despite the fact that in a lightning short campaign, that the postal vote accounted for 58% of the turnout, despite all of that, there on my hotel television, UKIP had gone from 0 to 25.2%. I thought, crikey, we're on our way. And then I thought, well, I'll just see the first county results coming through from Lincolnshire. And it says, UKIP win their first seat on Lincolnshire County Council. I think, great. UKIP wins second seat on Lincolnshire County Council. UKIP win, well, of course, I got to bed at 4:45. Because I simply couldn't believe what was happening. And I arrived the next morning at Millbank, and there must have been about 30 photographers there and camera crews, and I went in and did my stuff, and I came out and they were dogging me as I was walking down the street, all around me. I couldn't do anything. So I said to them, I said, look, it's 1 minute to 11. Some of you know where this is going, don't you? I said, it's 1 minute to 11, I'll do a deal. I know the photograph you want. If we go to the Marquis of Granby, and I buy a pint of bitter and drink it, will you go away and leave me alone? And sure enough, they did. It was amazing. 147 county council seats in which we won. I think more impressively is the fact we were second in 900 seats, second in more seats than any other party in those elections. And I have to say one particularly big thanks, because there's one politician who I think did push us perhaps over the line, who perhaps was worth an extra 3% to our score. I could scarcely believe on that Sunday morning, as I was in the kitchen making coffee, and Sky News was on the television, and they panned to a garden in Nottinghamshire, where former Chancellor of the Exchequer, Kenneth Clarke, dressed in a rather bizarre turtleneck arrangement, stood in front of the camera, looking as though he'd been dragged through a hedge backwards after a heavy Saturday night, and declared that UKIP were a bunch of clowns. And I thought, thank you, Ken. So for those of you that are coming to the party conference in London on September the 20th, I will be inaugurating the annual Kenneth Clarke Cup for services to Euroscepticism. You never know, when the history books are written, it may turn out he was the most brilliant double agent of the lot. You never know. So what has happened as a result of all of this is we are now having a national debate on the question of immigration. The question that the other parties have tried to brush under the carpet for decades, dare not to discuss, certainly not in front of the children, don't frighten the horses, don't discuss it, it will go away. And we've dared to talk about it, and we've talked about it, I think, in absolutely sensible terms. We're not against anybody in UKIP, and we want good skilled people from around the world to come to this country, and to be part of this country, and to commit to this country. But we cannot go on with an open-door immigration policy giving us an extra 500,000 people every single year. Enough's enough, and it's time we took back control of our borders. Well, of course, since May the 2nd, they're all talking about immigration, aren't they? Mr. Cameron's going to be tough. Mr. Miliband's going to be tough. Mr. Clegg's going to be tough. There's almost a bidding war going on for who can be the toughest on immigration. I have to say that some of their right-wing rhetoric really worries me. But what won't change is this. On the 1st of January next year, we open our doors to 28 million people from Romania and Bulgaria. And regardless whether they're good, hard-working people, regardless whether they're members of criminal gangs, we are opening up our doors and our benefit system to those people unconditionally at a time when we already have 1 million of our own young people out of work. And there is nothing the other parties can do about this, because they're all committed to EU membership and they're all committed to the free movement of people. And I'll make you a prediction. If anything like the numbers come next year from Romania and Bulgaria to this country, that I think will, that issue alone, I think, could have an even more dramatic effect on British politics next year than you've seen from UKIP this year. It has the ability, I think, to propel UKIP into a remarkable political position. And of course, they're all talking about Europe too. You know, we've shifted the European debate, at least in terms of the Conservative Party, because remember, the last time the House of Commons discussed the idea of an in-out referendum with an amendment, there was a 3-line whip from Mr. Cameron to tell his people not to vote for a referendum because it was unnecessary. And that debate yesterday in the House of Commons would not have happened if it wasn't for the fact that, once again, UKIP is forcing the agenda. As for Mr. Miliband deserting the battlefield, well, I'll come to that in a moment. But there are perhaps 2 big questions that everybody wants us to answer. Now, I went this morning to Salford. It's the first time that I've been there, and I hope that the media city in Salford is a success. Because just as politics in this country is too dominated by a London-based metropolitan so-called liberal elite, I'm afraid the British media suffers from much of the same phenomenon. And it is now common parlance in the press that UKIP get their votes from the Conservative Party, and therefore a vote for UKIP means the Tories won't win the election and we'll get Ed Miliband, and that'll be worse for Britain than Mr Cameron, won't it? That is what you'll read in the national newspapers. They are the questions that the BBC interviewers will ask me on every single interview. And I think we've got to deal with this as a party. We've got to make it absolutely clear that we are not just a splinter group of the Conservative Party. Far from it. UKIP is a party that draws its support from the left, from the centre, from the right. The question of who governs this country, the question of being patriotic and controlling our borders is not a left-wing or a right-wing issue. It's about common sense and what is right for our country. And we're beginning to get the evidence and the data that proves it. You know, the day after Eastleigh, the Daily Mail said, UKIP cost the Conservatives the Eastleigh seat. Well, after the by-election, Lord Ashcroft spent a fortune finding out who had voted UKIP, why had they voted UKIP, and where had they come from politically before. And it's very good of Lord Ashcroft to spend all that money because it saves us having to do it. And what it showed was that exactly a third of the UKIP vote had come from the Conservative Party. A third of the vote had come from the Lib Dems. 20% of the vote came from Old Labour, and 10% of the vote, which we should be even prouder of in my opinion, came from people who had not voted for anybody for the last 20 years, but felt re-engaged by UKIP in getting back in politics. So it wasn't UKIP that cost the Conservatives the seat in Eastleigh. What cost the Conservatives the prospect of winning the seat in Eastleigh is that in those traditional Hampshire villages along the River Itchen, sort of Jack Hargreaves land if you like, that in those villages traditional Conservatives were used to their leader talking about enterprise, business and success. And what they've had with Mr Cameron is a Conservative leader who thinks gay marriage, wind turbines and foreign aid are the absolute priorities for his government. That's why the Conservative Party did bad at Eastleigh. It's not just because of UKIP. We are drawing more of our support from across the board, from the other parties and from non-voters that we're getting from the Conservative Party. And just look at the by-elections. Just look at the fact we came second in Rotherham, we came second in Barnsley, we came second in Middlesbrough, and we came a big second in South Shields. The north of England, I think we've got the potential, folks, up here. We can become the opposition party in politics in the whole of the north of England, and we can do it in the elections in the spring of next year. That's what I'm saying. And we now have an even bigger potential, I think, with the Old Labour vote in this part of the world. Not only is Ed Miliband's party being dragged back into the 1970s by McCluskey and all these dinosaurs that I thought were extinct. Not only is that happening to them, but Ed Miliband himself is completely incapable of connecting with ordinary working class people. It's true. Completely incapable of doing so. And I think we in this party, and Paul Nuttall and others up here in the north of England, we are capable of connecting with ordinary, decent, working class people, and we must turn our guns, particularly on the Labour vote. They've got a leader that doesn't connect. They've got a leader that at the moment says he won't give people a referendum. They've got a leader who, despite high youth unemployment rates, is happy to open the doors to Romania and Bulgaria. And my message to you in UKIP Northwest is let's get into the big cities, let's go for the Labour vote. We can do it. We can pick up their votes in the north of England by the hundreds of thousands. So let's get organised, let's get out there, let's do it. So let's hear no more. Let's hear no more of this splitting the vote argument. If you vote UKIP, you'll split the vote and let Labour in. And I've no doubt, as we grow in the north, Labour people will say, if you vote UKIP, you'll split the vote and let the Tories in. All these arguments will be used. What we showed in 150 county council seats on May the 2nd was that actually, nowadays, if you vote UKIP, what you will get is UKIP, and that we can now win under the first past the post electoral system. And the second change of debate, and again it's back to the media, is all anybody wants to talk about is the general election of 2015, and are we going to be doing deals with anybody? I'm not interested in doing deals with anybody at this stage of the game. Why should I be? We've got our own vibrant, real, growing political party here, and the point is, there are national elections taking place on the 22nd of May next year. It's as if no one's noticed. But we're going to be fighting the European elections on May the 22nd next year, and UKIP will be fielding full slates of candidates in England, Scotland, Wales, and indeed in Northern Ireland too. A truly national political party, and I genuinely believe that we have got an opportunity in those European elections next year to go one better than we did in 2009, where we came second. I believe that on May the 22nd, we can win those European elections and cause an earthquake in British politics. But in a funny way, it isn't the European elections on May the 22nd next year that matter as much as the local elections, which take place on May the 22nd next year. There are just over 5,000 council seats up for grabs, mostly at district level, some at unitary level, up and down the country. Here in the northwest, there are over 400 seats up next year. They're mostly in Lancashire, in Merseyside, and in Manchester. Now, what we've got to do, we've got to make sure in the northwest that UKIP is on every single one of those ballot papers. And that is going to need people in this room to volunteer, to come forward and to give us a hand. Because just think about it. If people have already made their minds up to vote UKIP in the European elections, when they go into the polling station and they're given 2 ballot papers, the chances are they'll vote UKIP on both ballot papers. And I think we've got the opportunity. If what we did on May the 2nd was to establish bridgeheads on county councils up and down the land, I believe we have the opportunity on May the 22nd next year to win many, many hundreds of council seats up and down the country. And here's the rub. What the Liberal Democrats under Ashdown and Kennedy proved, and remember, this was a party that was down to about 12 seats in Westminster and rose to just over 60 seats in Westminster. What the Liberal Democrats proved is that to win at parliamentary level, what you first have to do is to have won a cluster of seats at council level. Because once you've shown you can win in that constituency under first past the post at council level, people then think you're in with a chance in the general election. So people keep asking me, what are our prospects for the general election? The answer, folks, is I don't yet know. But ask me after May the 22nd next year. If we're able to win 150 seats this year, if we're able to come second in 900 seats this year, just think on the back of a European election what we can do next year. And if we do that, we'll have the clusters. If we do that, we'll be able to identify where our strongest areas are, and for the first time ever in a UKIP general election campaign, we will be able to target our resources on the most winnable seats. If we get that right, We will then put a significant number of UKIP members of Parliament into the Commons in May 2015, and then there actually will be a referendum. Thank you.